dangerous travel, shipwreck, pirates and brigands, becoming slaves or imprisoned in a foreign land, apparent death, near crucifixion, empty tombs, divine intervention and miraculous rescue. Are these the Acts of the Apostles? No, these are just a few of the adventures in the Ephesian tale of Anthea and Habrachomes. Xenophon's story gives us a glimpse into the Greco-Roman world, the culture of the first half of the 2nd century CE. Welcome to Ms.Interpretations. My name is Marin, and this is my virtual campfire. And today, it's story time. If you haven't seen my video on Chaereas and Callirhoe, I recommend you go see that first. I go into more detail there about the parallels to the New Testament, and it'll give a little more context for you as we go through this story. An Ephesian tale has features of the romance novel, but the story is better seen as a folk tale. Basically, it has similar themes as the other romances, but the story itself is focused on telling events, and it can be a bit disjointed and choppy. It's like the Timu version of Chaereas and Callirhoe. It sometimes looks just like the original, but parts of it just don't work. Like Chaereas and Callirhoe, the story begins with describing the main characters, Anthea and Habrachomes, as coming from the leading families of the city. In this case, it's Ephesus, not Syracuse. They are the most beautiful people, like the gods and goddesses, and they meet at a religious festival. This time it's the festival of Artemis. Habrachomes is so handsome that he actually starts to believe his own hype, and he ends up being rather haughty about it. He mocks the god Eros, saying that Eros could never have a hold over him, and Eros isn't even as good looking as he is anyway. You can probably see where this is going. Eros isn't going to let that go. Habrachomes sees Anthea as they march in the festival parade, and they both swoon at the sight of each other. They fall in love at first sight, start to waste away due to being in love, and their parents actually seek out the oracle of Apollo to tell them how to heal their children. The oracle tells them that they will travel and go through hardships, but after suffering, they will have a better fate. So, Anthea and Habrachomes get married, and because of the oracle, their parents send them off on a trip together. Their first stop is in Rhodes. As they walk about the city, they are admired for their beauty, and they are thought to be a visitation from the gods. Habrachomes and Anthea stop and make an offering at the temple of Helios, the sun god. They actually create a plaque which reads, "The strangers offered you these weapons of beaten gold, Anthea and Habrachomes, citizens of holy Ephesus." Flash your wealth around in the Greco-Roman world, and you are going to attract the attention of pirates, no? Phoenician pirates attacked their ship at sea and took them captive to sell as slaves, along with Lucan and Rhodi, servants of Anthea and Habrachomes. They sail to their pirate home of Tyre in Phoenicia. The pirate chief Apsyrtos has a daughter named Manto, who, of course, falls in love with Habrachomes. She writes him a letter to tell him this. Habrachomes refuses her advances, which infuriates her. Meanwhile, Manto's father, Apsyrtos, comes home with a husband for her. Manto tells her father that Habrachomes tried to force himself on her. So, without investigation, he has Habrachomes beaten and imprisoned. The scorned Manto then sends Lucan and Rhodi away to Syria to be sold, and sends Anthea to live with a goat herd as his wife. Well, the goat herd hears Anthea's story and takes pity on her. So far, both Habrachomes and Anthea have been able to preserve their chastity and fidelity to each other. Manto's father, the pirate, he realized that Habrachomes is actually innocent when he happens to find the letter that Manto wrote to Habrachomes insisting that he come to her bed. Well, to make it up to Habrachomes, Apsyrtos makes him head of the household. Manto doesn't really get in trouble. In fact, she's still very jealous of Anthea, and she sells Anthea to a merchant from Cilicia. Well, that ship gets looted by a different band of pirates led by a fella named Hippothous. Habrocomes hears what happened to Anthea, and he leaves Apsyrtus's household behind to go and search for her in Cilicia. Back in Cilicia, Hippothous' pirate band decide that they need to make a sacrifice to Ares, the god of war, and that the sacrifice is going to be Anthea. Well, just in time, a Roman official named Perillus, who was cracking down on pirates in Cilicia, he rode in to save Anthea and destroy the pirates. Although Hippothous did manage to escape. Well, of course, Perillus falls in love with Anthea, and he wants to marry her. She's afraid that he may force himself on her, so she does agree to marry him, but she asks that they wait for a month, hoping that maybe he'll change his mind or something else might happen. Now, Habrocomes got lost on his way to Cilicia, and Hippothous was escaping Cilicia, and they just happened to meet on the road. They share stories of their travels and their tribulations, and they actually become fast friends. Habrocomes tells him about Anthea, but he does not mention her name. When Hippothous finds out that Habrocomes and his wife are from Ephesus, he tells Habrocomes about the young woman that he captured from there, but I don't think he told Habrocomes that he had actually intended to sacrifice her to Ares. Anyway, they both realize that it was Anthea, and they resolve to find her together. So they head back to Cilicia. Anthea is so distraught about having to marry Perillus, and she thinks Habrocomes died as Apsyrtus's prisoner. She didn't know that he became head of the household. She wishes to die, and she asks a doctor for a poison to end her life. He gives her a sleeping potion instead. She takes the potion while Perillus is still partying at the wedding, and she falls into such a deep sleep that they mistake her for being dead. Perillus is despondent, and he buries her with all of her finery, gold and silver. This is Anthea's first apparent death. Another band of pirates, this time from Egypt, come to rob the tomb, and they find Anthea alive. She begs them to let her die, but they take her to Alexandria, Egypt. Perillus learns of Anthea's empty tomb and is inconsolable. The story of what happened to Anthea actually reaches Habrocomes and Hippothous in a brigand camp. Habrocomes immediately sets out alone to find her. In Alexandria, Anthea is sold to an Indian merchant. She fends off his advances by telling him that she was dedicated at birth to the goddess Isis, and that dedication, it won't be over until she's old enough to marry, which just happens to be a year from now. So the man does not want to anger Isis, so he relents and he keeps away from her. She's a clever girl. The ship that Habrocomes stows away on in order to get to Alexandria, well, it wrecks, and it's washed ashore. Some local herdsmen find them, and instead of being nice and helping them out, they take everything, and they take the men into Egypt and sell them as slaves. Y'all, why does anyone go anywhere during this time period? I mean, you'd think that Habrocomes and Anthea's parents would have known better than to send them out on this trip when they were still teenagers. I guess they didn't want to upset the gods because of the oracle and everything, but okay, going on. The man who buys Habrocomes has a hideous yet passionate wife named Chaereas. Well, of course, she falls in love with Habrocomes, and she promises to kill her own husband so that she can be with Habrocomes. Well, he thinks that this is vile. Then she does it. When she tells Habrocomes, he is disgusted and just runs away. She's big mad, and she tells the authorities that Habrocomes killed her husband and ran away. Well, they find him and arrest him. Without hearing evidence from Habrocomes, the prefect sentences Habrocomes to crucifixion. They tie him up with ropes onto the cross. That's the Egyptian way. They set up his cross on the banks of the Nile. Habrocomes prays to the sun god, Helios, and asks that he not die if he's innocent. Well, suddenly a wind comes up and blows Habrocomes and his cross down off of the bluff and into the Nile. So Habrocomes floats down the Nile until he's found and taken back to the prefect. Well, he's angrier than ever, and he orders that Habrocomes be burnt alive. As they light the fire, Habrocomes prays again, and the Nile rises up and douses the flames out. This is Abercrombie's second near-death experience, and the guards that witnessed it, they take him back to the prefect and tell him about the miracle that they saw. This time, the prefect finally asks Abercrombie for his side of the story. When the prefect hears what happened, he gives Abercrombie enough gifts to get him home to Ephesus. Instead, Abercrombie wants to find Anthea and sails towards Italy. I have no idea why he sails to Italy. It's just another one of those jumps in the story. The prefect did go and find Chaereas, though, and he did crucify her for murdering her husband, so there is that. Meanwhile, the Indian fella that bought Anthea, he decides to take her home to India, and as they enter Ethiopia, wouldn't you know, Hippothous has a new band of brigands. He attacks them and collects the booty and Anthea. Well, they didn't recognize each other. She lies about who she is, giving them a fake name. She says, "Oh, I'm from Egypt." You know, I think if someone tried to hang me from a tree so that they could throw javelins at me, all in the name of sacrifice to Ares, I might just recognize him a few months later. And if Anthea was as beautiful as the story says, it seems Hippothous, he might have recognized her too, right? Especially since he was looking for her with Abercrombie a few months ago. I mean, dang. One of the pirates tries to force himself on Anthea, so she grabs a nearby sword and holds it up as he comes at her. Well, when Hippothous comes back and sees that she's killed the guy, he demands that she be thrown into a pit with two big, hungry dogs. Seriously? This becomes Anthea's second apparent death, and the second time Hippothous tries to kill her. Anthea's guard was already in love with her, so he keeps her safe by feeding the dogs and her. When Hippothous and the others go off to plunder more, the guard stays behind and he frees Anthea from the pit. Hippothous' band get overrun by Roman soldiers, and Hippothous escapes again. Yet the Romans also find the guard and Anthea, and she gets taken to Italy to be sold to a brothel. Well, when Anthea is put on display at the brothel, she fakes an epileptic seizure. It's called the divine disease. The brothel keeper, he feels sorry for her, and after she recovers, he decides to sell her. After Hippothous escapes this time, he marries an older woman because he's got no money. And after a little while, she dies. And now he's got lots of money. So he just happens to go to Italy. Well, since he has money, he decides to buy some servants. And when he goes to the market to buy some, this time he recognizes Anthea. He thought she was dead in the dog pit, and he doesn't know how she could have survived. She was apparently dead to him, and now she is alive again. She still doesn't recognize him, though. I mean, maybe it's trauma, I don't know, but really? I mean, if someone hung me from a tree to throw javelins at me and then later threw me into a pit for dogs to tear me apart, I think I'd recognize this guy. So Hippothous then buys her and tells her who he is. She asks him to forgive her for killing his friend, and then tells him what really happened and how she escaped the pit. Does he ask for her forgiveness for trying to kill her twice? Nope. He falls in love with her, and amid her refusals, she finally tells him about Abercrombie. He is overjoyed because he considers Abercrombie his friend. He tells her that he will do everything to reunite her with Abercrombie. Anthea and Abercrombie's servants, Lucan and Rhode, remember them from way back in the beginning of the story? Well, they end up in Rhodes, and they dedicate a pillar in the temple of Acilles in the name of Abercrombie and Anthea, and they sign it Lucan and Rhode. Abercrombie stops by Rhodes on his way from Italy back home to Ephesus. He goes to the temple, and he sees the pillar and weeps in gratitude to how loyal his servants had been. Lucan and Rhode find him there at the temple and have him come home with them as they are free now. Now, you might remember that Rhodes is the first city that Anthea and Abercrombie went to on their trip, and that's where they put the plaque. So the plaque is in the temple as well. Now, Hippothous also sets out for Ephesus to take Anthea home, and they stop over in Rhodes as well. They go to the temple during a public festival honoring Helios, the sun god, where Anthea cuts off a lock of her hair and dedicates it to the god with the inscription, On behalf of her husband Habracomes, Anthea dedicated her hair to the god. They leave the temple without seeing Leucon and Rhode's pillar. Shortly, Leucon and Rhode come to the temple and they see Anthea's lock of hair and inscription. Everyone but Habracomes comes back to the temple the next day. And at first, Leucon and Rhode, they don't recognize Anthea. But as they talk, they do recognize her and they tell her who they are and that Habracomes is living with them. This not recognizing people is becoming a bit of a theme, don't you think? I'll do a video on that another day. The whole town starts to rejoice at the reunion, and someone runs to tell Habracomes. Well, he runs to Anthea. They embrace, and all is well. They tell each other that they both remained faithful to each other. They make sacrifices to Helios, and they all soon return to Ephesus, even Hippothous. It's easy to get lost in all of the story loopholes and repetition of shipwreck and pirate capture and enslavement. But taking a closer look, the themes and practices in Greco-Roman culture that are reflected in this story, they also have parallels in the New Testament. First, we have the overarching theme of humiliation exaltation. We recognize them to be the heroes of the story because they are compared to the gods and goddesses, and they go through trials, literally, and tribulations, and they are exalted in the end. As a part of their humiliation, they endure shipwreck, attacks by pirates and brigands, being sold into slavery, being flogged and put into prison, near crucifixion, threats to chastity, apparent death, empty tombs, mistaken identity, and are finally rescued by divine intervention before reuniting and returning home amid celebration. If we look at the New Testament, we can see Paul and other apostles repeatedly being flogged and imprisoned in the book of Acts. Paul even goes through a shipwreck described in Acts 27. Also, in 2 Corinthians 11:23 through 33, Paul recounts humiliations that he's endured in his travels as he spreads the gospel. While he endures hardships, his hope is to be exalted in Christ. With far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless floggings, and often near death. 5 times I have received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I received a stoning. 3 times I was shipwrecked. For a night and a day I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys in danger from rivers, danger from bandits, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers and sisters. In toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, hungry and thirsty, often without food, cold, and naked. This listing of hardships, almost like an aria of lament in an opera, it's a literary device called a peristasis catalog. It's a listing by the character of what they've been through, and it serves to signify their virtue in enduring hardships. The peristasis catalog is a rhetorical device found in the Greek philosophies of Stoicism and Cynicism, which infiltrated the Greco-Roman culture of this time. We see this element throughout the narrative as characters recount their stories to one another or lament their current state of imprisonment or slavery. Another similarity to Paul is divine intervention for a narrow escape of death. Anthea is rescued from sacrifice to Ares by Perillaius at the last minute after praying to Helios. And Habracomes is rescued from death on the cross by a strong wind sweeping him into the Nile, and he is saved again after another prayer to Helios by the Nile dousing out the flames of his intended funeral pyre. As for Paul, we read in Acts 27, starting in verse 32, "In Damascus, the governor, under King Aretas, guarded the city of Damascus in order to seize me. But I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped from his hands." This was an escape with some divine intervention. In addition to multiple shipwrecks and raids by pirates and brigands, Anthea and Habracomes apparently die many times or barely escape death and are seen alive again. There are multiple empty tombs in this story as well. While it isn't actual death and resurrection as claimed about Jesus in the New Testament, the heroes are dead to the other characters in an Ephesian tale and are miraculously alive again with the help of the gods. We see similar recurring themes in these romances and in the New Testament, not because one is copying the other, but because they are features of Greco-Roman culture and recognizable narrative elements of this time period that help to create exciting stories. I'll see you next time, and until then, safe travels.